Good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would like to first welcome UNI faculty, staff, and students to this program, as well as our community members. Welcome to the first installment of our courageous conversation, The Purple Couch. My name is Jamie Butler-Chidozie, and I serve as Director for Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice here at the University of Northern Iowa. And I am truly excited for this afternoon's critical conversation that we're going to have in regards to policing the community. Those of you who are here live, as well as are tuning in via our YouTube channel or Facebook, might be wondering, what is the Purple Couch? The Purple Couch allows us an opportunity to do a deep dive into some critical conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion in a very honest way, asking those critical and sometimes tough questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, what I'm going to ask is for our panelists to introduce themselves. We have Chief here with the UNI Police Department, and Dr. Mark Nook here, President of the University of Northern Iowa. So just to delve right into our conversation, would you please introduce yourselves and share your vision for the University of Northern Iowa in regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion from your perspective positions?
Well, I'm Mark Nook. I'm the president of the University of Northern Iowa, and I've been here 3.5 years, something like that. Really, for me, I addressed this topic during the university address, which is available online, but I think it is a really important question. For me, diversity, of course, means difference. It really is that simple. It is about providing difference and having differences of perspectives, but that means having people of different races, different genders, different gender orientations, sexual orientations, different levels of physical, mental, and emotional abilities, different perspectives and viewpoints on different topics of the day. What we often do in higher ed is measure that difference in the areas where we can collect the data. So we have sort of an equitable representation on our campus in another population. And for me, diversity will look, we still have a long ways to go to get to our diversity goals, because we have fewer minority students on our campus than are in the population of students in that 18 to 24-year-old group, and even less than we have in the portion of the 18 to 24-year-old group that have a high school diploma, right, which is who we recruit from. We also are behind in our faculty and staff ranks, and especially our faculty ranks. And so it's an area that we need to continue to work on and develop that diversity. Inclusion for me is, providing an equitable opportunity for everyone to be successful. And that means, because equity sets in there, understanding the strengths and the different abilities that people bring to the campus and being able to meet them where they are, make sure they all have an equitable opportunity, and providing the support systems for everybody so that everybody has an equitable opportunity to be successful here. If we are really providing an equitable opportunity, we will have equal outcomes. And at the moment, we don't. We're getting closer, but we need to continue to work on that. So at the point that we have equal outcomes across all of our different ways that you can look at diversity on our campus, we will have achieved our goal. We aren't there. We've got a lot of work to do on that yet.
Awesome, thank you. Chief here, how would you respond to that question from your perspective position of what would you say would be your vision for the University of Northern Iowa in regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Well, I would echo what the president said, of course, that we're working on it, but we still have a long way to go. From a police perspective, our goal is to have that diversity within the department so we can better interact with our diverse community, and we need that difference. If you, like the president said, it's not all about one thing. It's inclusive of everybody, and in order to do that, we need to be more diverse, and we have some work to do to reach that goal. We recognize that, and that is our goal, because we serve the community and we should reflect that community.
Thank you. Tonight's conversation again is centered around community policing. So just think about in regards to contemporary societal conditions that we see in our nation, specifically around police brutality against Black and brown bodies, nationwide and even more recently from a global perspective. Tonight's conversation is about the best ways in which to meet community needs in regards to community policing in an equitable way. So we have some tough questions for our panelists to kind of lead us into having an honest conversation about where we're at as an organization. Of course, this type of conversation has been sparked by different situations that have happened in our community with the murder of George Floyd. There has definitely been an outcry and a call on a federal level, a state level, and even a local level to look critically at policing and what it means. In fact, we've had UNI students who have been very active in protesting, even throughout the summer and even into the fall, and have taken a fairly strong stance in how they feel our community should be policed here at the institution, and have actually asked for some demands in that regard. And so what we want to do is shed some light on that, provide an opportunity to be transparent and to answer some of those tough questions that our students, our faculty, staff, and our community members have put forth for our institutional administrators. And so I will say that these questions have been garnered by the community. So let's get right into it. We know that this is a sticky conversation, but we're here to get it done. So Chief Hare, the first question is to you. The 8 Can't Wait campaign is a national campaign looking critically at policing, and it has gained tremendous national attention. As I stated in the introduction about in regards to the topic, UNI students have been protesting and actually have set forth some demands and are wanting some answers in regards to many of those precepts that are laid out in the 8 Can't Wait campaign. In response to that campaign, the UNI police did an assessment of its practices and answered some of those concerns in a document that was released here recently to our university constituents. Can you share the contents of that report in regards to those demands that were set forth by our student leaders?
Sure. We did that assessment. We started that back in the summer, like you said, in response to everything that's happening nationally, because we need to reflect and see what we're doing, and if we're doing things correctly, or if we need to change something, we need to look at that. So the report actually contains different types of information. It addresses that. We give a little bit of an overview about university policing. We talk about some of our training. We give some statistics on some specific areas. But as far as the 8 Can't Wait goes, we looked at those, and actually 5 of the 8 we already had in official policy. We actually had 6, let me correct that. 5 were addressed individually. The 6th one was in a separate policy. That was the one about shooting a moving vehicle. That was addressed in our vehicle pursuit policy. So we had 6 of the 8 already. The other 2, even though they weren't in any official policy, they were not our practice. Specifically, the ban chokeholds and strangleholds. Well, the reality is that in the state of Iowa, that's not even taught to police officers. So that was not part of our norm in our use of force continuum. So we didn't do it, but it wasn't written anywhere that we didn't do it. So now it has been incorporated into the policy, so it is written in there. Along the same line, the duty to intervene, that was not specifically in the policy, but once again, that was part of our practice. We have, if you look at the report, I also talk about the training that the officers receive at the State Training Academy And when they're finished there, they come here and they do an additional 12 weeks of what we call field training, where they are with an experienced certified field training officer, and we have a curriculum that they go through, that they have to meet the standards here before they can pass probation and stay in their employment. So that was part of that process, that field training program. Was if you're with another officer and you see something that they're doing or behavior they're engaging in that is not appropriate, it is your duty to report the officer to the supervisor. So we were doing that, it just wasn't written in the official policy. So we corrected that immediately, so it is written in the policies now.
Okay. So just to kind of clarify, the two that weren't originally written into the policy, you, the police department, have gone and kind of corrected those
Right.
two particular to create policies around that.
Right.
Okay.
And actually the one that was addressed in the vehicle policy, the shooting in a moving vehicle, it is still there, but it is also in the other policy also. So we just put it in another place.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that update. Definitely, I know that that was a big part of student demands, specifically around how we move forward as an institution in community policing. Now, we know that policy in and of itself doesn't make our institution or our organization equitable in regards to even policing. And there's even concerns of, the necessity of policing the community, or is there a different way we can go about envisioning? And so these next questions are probably a little bit more tougher to have a conversation about, but I do think it is important and it's important to have these honest conversations. So I'm just going to give it right to you as is written, and either you or Dr. Nook can kind of share your thoughts around this question, and specifically what it means for you and I. So the question is broad, but I would like for you to speak to it in its broad form, but also try to connect it to our community. Do you believe that police departments here in America have an issue with systematic racism, harassment, police brutality, specifically towards African Americans, but also other minoritized groups?
I'll take that one first.
Okay.
I think it is a problem. I do. I think if we look at policing historically, that it's there. It's been there for a very long time, and in some ways, policing reflects society in general. What we do is sometimes what society wants us to do, so you have to delve deeper into the societal issues, which leads to the systemic part of the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, I think there probably is some systemic racism and inequitable treatment in police departments. That's, yeah.
Yeah. You really don't have to look too far into the data to see it. It's clear in almost all of the data. It's clear in the reports we see. It's not just anecdotal. A lot of people do like to look at the anecdotal data and points and point out the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. And yet, really, you start to look at the statistics, and they're much, much deeper. And there's really some evidence behind it. You look at prison records and things of that sort. It's pretty clear that we do have an issue. And I think bringing it to light and having it open and discussing about it is a way that we can start to address that and make some changes to it.
Mm-hmm. The criminal justice system as a whole has some problems.
Absolutely.
Everything from on the street to the prison system to the post-prison, there are issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think anybody who says otherwise is not educated. And
yeah. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in various levels of policing, even globally, the things that are happening even right now in Nigeria with, again, young people, college students who are calling for critical look at policing, we're seeing it, and the reactions of that system, that oppressive system, in response to that protest is definitely mirroring what we are seeing even here in America in regards to that. And so I want to delve a little bit deeper into the second part of that question, because I don't think we necessarily are kind of getting to it, and I really kind of want to bring it home, specifically to talk about policing, our police department, but policing here at the University of Northern Iowa. And so when we think about the justice system, and Chief Hare, you stated, you said, yeah, anyone who's looking at policing and not seeing the disparities that Dr. Nook had pointed out, it's just, you're just blinded. You have to see it. And so, so can we really say that UNI police then is exempt from that? And so I want to talk about that, and to talk about specific steps that UNI police, and it could be even UNI, it could be, but specifically we're talking about policing, that the UNI police is taking to root out that systematic racism that definitely exists in our justice system with the police force, and to make sure that what are policies around if an officer is shown to not exude the values that we have here at this institution in regards to equity. Sure.
I can tell you some of the things. I mean, I've been here just over 8 years now. When I got here, there was nothing to indicate that we had an overt problem, if you will. But one of the first things I did was we talked about anti-bias policing. That was very important. That we have to do the best we can to not have any bias in our policing. But in order to root out, I think was your term.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do, and I know most people don't probably know this, but when our officers write reports, those reports are reviewed by multiple people. And they're reviewed for everything from spelling and grammar to did you fill in all the blanks that you were supposed to, did you put all the elements of the crime in there? It's reviewed for many different reasons. But one of the residuals from that is those of us who read those reports, if there is a concern that we see consistently in an officer, we can address that. And it might not, and I'm not saying that it's a problem with having racist tendencies. It could be anything. Hey, you consistently don't do this, or you consistently don't tell me what the alcohol level was on the OWI. We see patterns. So that's one thing that we do. We do as much education as we can. We talk about everything that's happening in society. We run it through scenarios. If you remember, a good example was a couple of years ago, they had the incident at Colorado, or University of Colorado, with the Native American, the two Native American potential students who were in the group touring the campus, and somebody called the police department because they were concerned, and that went sideways very quickly. So one of the things we did is I actually printed out the article. I gave it to all the shift lieutenants. I said, let's have conversations with our officers about if we got this call, what would we do? And it starts not just with the officers, but it starts with the dispatchers. When somebody calls and reports somebody as suspicious, well, what do you mean by that? What makes them suspicious? Don't just tell me that they don't look like they belong. So, you've got to ask the right questions on the front end, so when the officers get there, they have as much information as they can. But if our officers, and they had some really good conversations, like, was it appropriate to go up to the two young men and basically in front of everybody call them out and question them. And they had a legitimate reason for being there. So what are some things that should have been done differently or could have been done differently? So we use those as educational moments. What can we do so that we don't make those same mistakes? And part of that is looking at yourself, how you approach a situation. So, you know, we have some things in place to help us weed out, I think is your term again, to identify if we have those issues. And it's not to be tolerated. It won't be.
One of the things that I asked about as we were sort of setting up to do the review, have the police department do the review this year, was to ask specifically for the data on especially race and ethnicity related records that we had and what those look like. So, and they're included in that report. There aren't a lot of interactions that race and ethnicity are recorded, so it's a small sample size, unfortunately. But we always track that, and those data are public, and we're going to continue to make them public. It is a way for us to kind of stay on top of systemic. As I pointed out in the beginning, right? If you're really inclusive and you're really equitable, then your outcomes are equal, and that's what we're really looking for. And that applies everywhere. It's not just in our educational outcomes, but our outcomes across this university.
Okay. Thank you. I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
It's still in that same vein
Okay.
of again, the systematic racism. Again, and I want to preface this because I think it's important, not just in the criminal justice system as a whole, but it's very important as a community, as an organization, when we're talking about systematic oppression, that we own our part, that we recognize that, yes, we are also a part of this. And so you talked about, Chief Hare, about the anti-bias training. Not bias training, excuse me. I believe you said like the anti-bias approach.
Right.
In talking about scenarios. So is that an internal approach? Is it like an external, like a consultant that's coming in and kind of viewing that? Or and let me ask. Let me just say why I'm asking, because I can only imagine. Because I know some of the individuals in the room are probably wondering. Well, let's look at the makeup of our UNI police department. Mm-hmm. And so, is this a bunch of white officers here at UNI? You know, like during their. I don't know. You get where I'm trying to go.
I understand what you're saying.
Like, you know, how is this anti-bias policing impacted by the makeup, the demographic of our institutional police department, and how do we address that?
And that's a good question. So the answer to your question is both. We have what we do internally. We've also had people external come in and do training with. We didn't just limit it to the officers, though. We actually had the whole Department of Public Safety, which includes our dispatchers and our parking operations, also sit in on the training. We hired a consultant from Minneapolis. She has her own consulting company, black female, great presenter. I'd actually seen her at a conference a few years ago, and the conference, this is kind of a sidebar, but the conference was all university police, and the people in the audience were at least mid-level and above, because it's law enforcement administrators. And when I tell you that in a room of 200, 300 police officers who were probably minimally in their late 30s on up to 60s, and within 5 minutes she had them in the palm of her hand. I mean, they were just, it was awesome. So realizing she was so close, I got involved and brought her here, and she did a great job, so we brought her back for a second time about a year and a half later. So we do both, and the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, ILEA, is the certification body here in the state of Iowa. They mandate certain training also. They just, about a month ago, it's not in the report because we hadn't done it yet, they mandated an additional 4.5 hours for every police officer in the state to be completed, and that the 4.5 hours was implicit bias and de-escalation training. So I'm happy to say that last week 13 of our 18 officers completed that. The other 5 will do it on December 1st when it's offered again. So it's both internal and external. So yes, we try to get people who are not within the same community to present to us too, because once again we want that diverse opinion, and it's not all university police officers. It's the person from the training last week. It wasn't an officer at all. So it was good training. It had a lot of the historical education on policing, which I think was enlightening to some people, as it was supposed to be.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I could ask you another question, but I definitely want to get to the questions that were submitted, and that because we want to make sure,
Sure.
It's not just about Jamie. This is about our community. There are UNI community members. We're talking faculty, we're talking students, staff, and even some community members here in the Cedar Valley who feel that the UNI police specifically should take more of a care approach. And let me back up because I know that we've had this conversation. I know I've had a one-on-one conversation in talking about even the necessity for a police department. There's been calls for UNI to sever ties, for example, with the Cedar Falls and the Waterloo police. Yeah, those are the two, yes. Specifically, there is a national abolitionist movement that's calling for the defunding of police. We hear that, and everybody's kind of like, what does that mean? And actually that movement even kind of puts out there in that process that it is taking more of a care approach to policing while we address some of these other things, like investing in the community, meeting the needs of people. Rather than what's described as a city approach to policing our community. I don't know if you kind of heard that narrative around here at UNI, and or ruling with an iron fist. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think the care approach is best. That is probably the primary reason I stayed in university policing, because it's a great environment to be in, and we're here for our community, for our students, and you have to enjoy being around students to be a successful university police officer, because we are a little different than the other policing agencies. The phrase I use is, I don't necessarily think we're better, I don't think we're worse, but we are different because we have a different community. So we absolutely believe in the care approach, and our goal is to help our student. Sometimes that means, just to pull an example out, if we have somebody who happens to have a little bit too much to drink, and technically they're violating the public intoxication, and we will many times we'll do everything we can not to arrest that person. We will try to find a sober friend or relative to come get them, to release them to. So we understand what it's like to be 18, 19, 20 years old, because we've all been there. Not to say that other agencies haven't been there, we all have. But we know that our students they're in a special place in their life. They have unique problems, some of them pretty severe problems. So when we see that student we will utilize all of our resources to get them help, whether it's, like I said, the public intox situation, or we have somebody in a mental health crisis. We have resources at our disposal that other agencies may not have, and we will use those as often as we possibly can, and they're really great to have. So we really do, and I go back to a lot of us, we have college-aged children, and so we even have an even better understanding of some of those challenges that those students might have, and we're going to work with them to try to help educate them. You know, while you're waiting on that friend to come pick you up, we might have that, was this really the smartest thing for you to do tonight conversation. But yes, we have to have a care approach, and once again, to be successful as a university police officer, you have to have that. And as I make mention of in the report, it's been my experience that people they thought they wanted to be a university officer, and they went through the process, but when they actually get into it, they realize, you know what, this is not the kind of policing I want to do. And it's to no detriment to them, because it's not the most exciting, it's not the constant activity. So they choose to leave university policing. And I give them kudos for recognizing that this is not what they want to do, and they know they won't be successful. So,
one of the things I think that's important about university policing, we've got an advantage. University police everywhere have an advantage. We've got the university around the police as well, and they have access to our student code of conduct processes as well. So everything isn't necessarily just a legal matter. We've also got the student code of conduct. We've got people on this campus that are here to serve the students as well, and to help students, whatever their issues that they're running into, right? We've got ways to support them, and the police are aware of those. Our campus police are aware of them and can turn to those in many of the cases that Helen was talking about, and not simply end up putting these into the court system or into a fine and a criminal ticket, but have an opportunity to work with student affairs and some of our other programs to support the student and help educate and move them along without a criminal record or a fine, that sort of thing happening.
That's exactly right, because we do work very closely with the Dean of Students office. So, and in all honesty, when other departments find out that we have this ability to have this, what I call an intermediate step or an intermediate action that we can take, we don't have to just, well, okay, you go ahead and don't do it anymore, versus, okay, now you have to go to jail. We've got something in between that we can utilize, i.e. the student conduct process. And it's really, they're jealous, to be quite honest. Sometimes they're jealous because we've had officers tell our officers, we wish we had something like that we could do, whether it's one extreme or the other sometimes for them. And they don't have that additional something they can do. And it's something also that, going back to the care part, even if we have respond to a student who passed out in the classroom or going up the steps, we let the Dean of Students office know about that, so they can check in with the student and say, hey, are you okay? Do you need student health center? So it's a good relationship we have.
And I think it's also important to keep in the forefront of our thought processes in our organization, in our minds, is that when we're talking about, the community care approach, is always in relation to equity. That equity is at the center of it, because again, getting back to some of the earlier questions that we talked about, and even some of the commentary that we've already kind of hashed over with the injustice that's embedded in our justice system, right? That's like an oxymoron. That there is injustice embedded in our justice, and that not only can filter down to our university policing, but that it absolutely does filter down into community policing. And so when we talk about community, the community care approach, what are those things that we can just continually remind ourselves beyond the policy? I'm very interested. I don't want to go back. I had another question about even like the anti-bias policing, like how can we better hone in on some of those things, because we can utilize that to really propagate the community care approach in relation to equity as we do some of these other things. And so, Dr. Nook, I'm going to direct this next question to you, because this question was directed to you specifically. Of course, you being the president of the University of Northern Iowa, most, if not, I'll say most of our constituents definitely consider that in regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion, it absolutely should be a top-down approach. That how you've centered equity, diversity, and inclusion is going to filter out throughout campus. So for the nature of this talk, the question that came was talking about, again, kind of the defunding of the police department, talking about policing equity, really kind of wanting to know where do you stand on these things, specifically tied to the student demands of the police department severing ties with the Cedar Falls and Waterloo police. There's also conversations around like the police labor and all those things that we've had some conversations about. But as the president of the University of Northern Iowa, where do you stand?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the way that you set that up, and I want to talk about that just a little bit, because I think in diversity, equity, inclusion work, the voice of the president, the voice of all leaders is really important, because it allows the grassroots voices to develop and to be able to come up. This can't be just a top-down, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. It needs to be a voice from a top that gives people the space to be able to operate and to be able to bring things forward. And I think that's where the voice is really important. Going to the question in particular, you know, if you go back to sort of when we created a police department on this campus and moved from really just campus safety to a real police department, it really was about creating a police force that is more community-centered and better understands what a university campus is about, the unique situations that are here, and being able to create a community-based police force here. Because most city police departments, and it's no different here than it is really across the country, all of these started at about the same time. It was that their focus isn't on handling 18 to 24-year-olds, a college crowd that's very different. And so police departments on campuses were really developed to get that community support there. The campus police departments do need to work with the community, because many of our students, most of our students, don't live on our campus. And they're going to interact with the Cedar Falls and the Waterloo Police Department, whether we have a relationship with those departments or not, because they're living in those communities. They're eating in those restaurants, they're shopping in those stores, they're at those taverns and bars, they're in those areas. So completely severing those ties is really going to be more problematic for many of our students, and more problematic for us being able to engage and help in some of those situations. So we need to think critically about what it really means to sever those ties. What ties are we talking about? Because we can't ever really keep our students out of that as long as if they're living out in the community. Our police have a geographic boundary. It's not a student boundary. We have a geography that we police. Cedar Falls has a geography that they police. We set inside their geography, but we have jurisdiction here. But outside of that, and many of our students live outside of that, and many students interact outside of that, makes it really difficult for us to say, we can protect our students if we sever ties. We can't. They'll still be interacting with Cedar Falls or Waterloo police outside our geographic boundary. One of the things that I think we need to think about, especially with defunding and returning our police department, say, to a completely public safety model, that is, not having a true licensed police force, is then we lose the geographic jurisdiction. And this region, our campus, would actually be under the jurisdiction of the Cedar Falls Police and, of course, the county police, county sheriff's office. So we need to, there are some real tricky issues in some of the things that are being asked about really what's it mean to completely sever those ties, and what's it mean to defund, especially take our police department back to a completely public service model. Then we're saying, you know, the Cedar Falls Police has jurisdiction here, and we're going back to where we were in the, you know, before about 2005 or 6, when our police force became a licensed police force. So there are some really tricky pieces to pull apart in all of that. How we use off-duty police officers from Cedar Falls, from Waterloo, from the county sheriff's office, those are things that we can have that open conversation about. When do we have them on our campus with events and those sorts of things? But our use of those is not large at this moment.
So kind of going along,
Yes.
again, we're talking about, we're kind of moving into the segment where we have definitely some questions around relationships, specifically with students, but just with even with staff members here who interact with UNI police. Again, centered around equity, centered around race, centered around other minoritized identities. Again, we're talking about equity here. Is that there have been people, particularly UNI student leaders, who have expressed concerns regarding conversations that they have tried to initiate with the UNI Police Department, specifically as it relates to the intersection of wellness checks and race. So students of color in particular feeling uncomfortable with how they have interacted with the police department. These student leaders feel that they have expressed feelings of not being heard. They feel like the police department, and of course that is always equated to UNI administration, has been very dismissive of their concerns. I need for you to, either one or both of you, to speak to that. One, to speak to that, but also how do we have to mitigate that? Like, we can't have students feeling that way. So I'll just stop there. I don't want to get on the soapbox here, but I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I haven't been involved in those direct conversations, but I have had student leaders come to me and raise their frustrations with me, and we're continuing to work on those. These are the kind of conversations we have to have. They have to be the tough conversations like we're having here, the ability for our students to continue to meet with, whether it's Chief Hare, other members of the university community, myself, the Chief's direct supervisor, and Vice President Hager. All of those are really important that we continue to have those conversations, and that we commit to actually listening and trying to make real progress on where we're going with these. We are at a time where these discussions are now going to be, one, easier to have because there's pressure to have them,
Right.
and harder to have because the discussions are more polarized, right? Mm-hmm. And so we really are in this time where we're going to have to find a way to come together and admit that we're having extremely complicated and difficult conversations around race, around difference, and how we have those conversations, and how we build enough respect and trust that we can have those conversations and feel like everyone's being heard. We may not always get the answer, whether it's administrators or students or faculty or staff. We may not always get the answer we really want, but how do we develop a better understanding of the lived experience of our black students, our brown students, all of our students, their interaction, whether it's with the police or a faculty member or a staff member in whichever office it is, right? How do we get to the point that we can really understand and gain a perspective of that truly lived experience on our campus. And it goes back for me to some of the things that I was saying at the beginning, right? We want to be inclusive. We want to increase diversity. If we're really inclusive, we recognize that we're going to have to have an equitable opportunity for people to be successful. That means we've got to recognize that everybody's coming to this institution with a different set of skills and a different way of looking at the world, a different lived experience. We have to listen to that lived experience and start to understand it, and then start to see how can we make this work within the structures that we have, and then what are the structures that we need to really look at and change, and how can we make that change happen in a way that is really effective for everybody involved, right? And again, it goes back to equitable, not equal, but equitable, and really understand, get to where we can understand the lived experiences, the fears that some of our students are bringing when they come to this campus, and how do we find a way to bring those barriers that they're facing, the barriers that we're creating, right? Bring those down so that everybody has an equitable campus to live on.
Chief here, did you want to kind of speak to that question?
I agree. I mean, I think we should sit down, but I think it should be a conversation with not just the police, not just the health center, not just administrators. I think it should be everybody, because I can't speak to what the counseling center does. They can't really speak. We can within a certain spectrum, but not completely. So have everybody, I'm going to say around the table, even though we're all Zooming now, have everybody around the table at the same time, so that you can hear every piece in the moment, because I may say something that sparks a question to the counseling center or vice versa. So if we all sit down and we do hear that voice to better understand those issues, and then say, okay, this is what we do, maybe we can tweak it, maybe we can't. It just depends on what it is, and just have everybody as part of the conversation, and maybe we can come to some agreement on, not that we don't agree now, but have some modifications into what's done.
I think it's fair to say that there's some things that, that we don't agree on. Like
exactly
there are some things, just in the sake of being honest. And I think what you just said, Chief Hare, really kind of leads into our next question in regards to having conversations are great. It is, and I feel here, particularly at the University of Northern Iowa, that we are in a place now, maybe that we haven't been in before, where we are at least willing to kind of overcome and again, I'm not from Iowa, but overcoming what has been described to me as this Iowa nice way of communicating and having conversations around these things, to doing some actionable things. And I think it's important to talk about that, because particularly for minoritized individuals, we're tired of talking, right? We want to see something happen. And so in thinking about that, I feel like you were kind of going there with the end of your statement. But if you could kind of conclude, I know we're coming up on our time here, but think about, I don't want to say in what ways, but I do want us to have a conversation about how we actualize what we're talking about. So when students bring concerns, when faculty and staff or community members bring concerns, that it doesn't end with just a conversation. That they don't feel like, here we go again, another talk, but that something actionable is going to happen because of these lived experiences that are happening on our campus. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
It does, and I'll talk just a little bit about, I see some things happening right, that are good along these lines, right? After some listening sessions that occurred over the last year, there was developed a set of both short-term and intermediate action items, immediate actions to be taken, and the short-term ones were to be done by May, and those were all taken care of. And the intermediate ones are to be done by the end of this semester, and they're well in progress, and they are moving forward, right? So it was out of those conversations that concrete action moved forward. It is a conversation at this point, but the formation of the President's Advisory Committee on Inclusion, Transformative Social Justice, and Advocacy that you chair, at the moment it's a conversation, right? It's another presidential committee, and I know both the hopes and the fears of presidential committees. But this one was appointed very, very differently. It's structured very, very differently. And that committee's involved in a conversation creating action items, right? The real proof will be what action comes out of that, and then where do we move from there. But I think you can see on our campus when you look at things like the Academic Affairs Division putting together Quest for Equity and a way to actually talk about and engage in learning about social justice, white supremacy, and really being able to think about what's it mean to be an equity-minded leader. The work that the university is doing with the Economic Summit, Economic Inclusion Summit, the work we're doing with One Waterloo, creating the Teach Waterloo program to help diversify the elementary education workforce in particular. Those are some real actionable items that are happening to try to help address and pull down these barriers that many of our students are facing, many of our community members are facing, so that we can actually get to these more equal outcomes, not just here on our campus, but throughout our community, but especially in our educational systems. But we're not done yet. We can't. We won't ever be done, but we've got to keep making big steps. But what we need to do comes from those conversations, right? That's where they all start.
Chief Pierre, can you kind of speak to that same sentiment? How do you view these conversations being actualized in the work that it may not just be with the police officers? I know you brought up several times public safety in general, and how that is made up of not just police officers, but our dispatchers, and I think there was another group of individuals. Oh, the park, of course, the parking police.
Everybody.
But action, like actualized in the work, yeah.
I think that it's hard to quantify that.
Right.
Based on what we do. We have to go back to being cognizant of the differences and being aware that we are responsible for our own actions and how we interact with the public that we serve. Okay? So we have those constant internal discussions, and we look at things that happen across the country and the world, and it's not something that we should really have to think about. I mean, you talk about having candid conversations and Iowa nice, and I'll be honest with you, in my previous experience, I came from a much more racially, ethnically diverse population demographic than here, and we had those conversations. I mean, I was very, very comfortable talking about issues of race, gender, whatever, within the department and within the university. But I think part of that goes back to the president's comments about, we do have more challenges here to get that diversity here in Iowa that other areas of the country don't have those issues. It's there. Now, how they deal with it may be a different issue, but at least they don't have the demographic drawbacks that we have here in Iowa. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking this time to kind of filter those questions. I'm sure, I don't know how you might react after this. Maybe you feel a little bit of relief, at least for right now. But I do want to kind of close this conversation in saying that accountability is important. Accountability is important for us as an institution, for us as an organization, and just us as a community that really wants to hold true to the value of humanity. At the beginning of this conversation, I asked a very pointed question to each of our panelists. I asked them to introduce themselves, but to also share what their particular vision in regards to their positionality here on campus of what it would look like here at the University of Northern Iowa in regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion from their own perspective, engaging even what that means in regards to how we police our community. We heard words like transparency, equity, a community of care, I want to make sure I get the terminology right, an anti-bias approach. It is time for us as an institution to continue not only to continue with these types of difficult conversations, a calling to the carpet or a calling to the couch, as you would, to filter these tough questions, not only to have it, but as a way to hold us accountable, to say that on this day, whatever the date is, I can't remember, on this date, this particular time, we as an institution said, this is where we are, these are our gaps, and this is how we want to move forward. Aristotle had a very famous quote in regards to inequality. The worst form of inequality is to try to make things, and I'm just paraphrasing, things equal that are unequal. And so what the both of you have expressed, and you can correct me after the cameras are off, is that we need as an institution to take a community care approach which equates to a critical resistance approach in regards to policing our community. It is centered around equity. We have to make sure that our community members, that we have met their needs. We have to make sure that we are investing in people versus investing in policy. We have to take a critical resistant approach, which is going to call for tweaking. As our Chief Hare has said, there's some things that we're just going to have to change as an organization, as an institution. This is not just a you and I call, as you both stated throughout this. I was taking notes as you both stated throughout this conversation. So this set my conclusion up perfectly. It's not just a call to the Cedar Valley. It's not even just a call to the state of Iowa. But again, this is a global call. And again, as I said at the beginning, we're seeing student activism around policing on a national level. We're seeing the past 10 days in Nigeria. I shared with that at the beginning. Students are being gunned down by government entities because of protesting what? Police brutality, policing. Not to say that it's to that extent here, but again, it's critical time for us to have these conversations. So we have to be comfortable with making sure that the discussion is not just about making things equal, okay? Because there's no way that we can do it, because we know that the system in and of itself is already unequal. Again, thank you, Chief Hare. Thank you, Dr. Nook, for having this conversation. Please join us for our next Purple Couch. It is going to be November the 4th, 2020. So,
Thank you for hosting and pulling this
Thank
together.
you very much.
Wonderful.